They thought I was weak. They mistook my silence for submission, my loyalty for ignorance. The betrayal cut deep, but I refused to bleed in public. I stood there, the shards of trust scattered, feeling nothing as they devoured my faith without hesitation. It was not their cruelty that surprised me, but my own naivety. In that moment, the blindfold of loyalty burned away, revealing a truth I had been too blind to see. They didn't just take from me, they woke me up. Confusion morphed into clarity as I dug into my own labyrinth of denial. I realized this hit hadn't shattered me. Instead, it fueled a fire in the stillness of my heart. No more explosive reactions, no more frantic chaos. All I needed now was time, the world's most powerful weapon. The calm before the storm became my sanctuary. Every moment of their triumph felt like a countdown. I switched from victim to observer, watching them celebrate the spoils while I gathered intel. They thought I was gone, but I was studying their flaws, their habits. Every mistake they were too arrogant to conceal. I would rise from the ashes, stronger, sharper, with vengeance that simmered silently. They had no idea what they had ignited. In the stillness that followed devastation, silence cradled me like a grave. I dissolved into the background, a ghost in my own life. They celebrated, unaware of the predator in their midst. Power lives in restraint, I recognized, in the quiet moments where observation blooms. I wasn't falling apart. I was gathering intelligence, a meticulous study of the ones who shattered me. I watched them build their false narratives, spinning my absence into laughter. They mistook their shouts for victories, their cheers drowning out the reality. I was not dead. I was data mining. Every casual conversation was a thread to pull, every careless whisper an insight. They fooled themselves into believing I was weak, but it wasn't pity that drove my retreat. It was survival. You learn more watching predators think you're dead. I'd become the still eye in their chaos, the calm before an unremitting storm. Their schedules unraveled before me like fabric, revealing seams of vulnerability. As they strutted in their arrogance, I absorbed every detail, mapping their strengths, then their flaws. Tonight I'd learned how they'd replaced me with a faceless surrogacy, how they believed their bolstered ranks would shield them from retaliation. But alliances crumble, trust decays. Each chuckle echoed with hubris, an orchestration of their impending misfortune. And I waited, cold and calculating, nursing the embers of their underestimation. They would not see what was coming. They never do when their prey is played unseen. I navigated the aftermath of my ruin like a phantom through an abandoned ruin. The laughter that once echoed between us now rang hollow as I stepped from the shadows, unrecognized. My fury simmered like a cauldron under the calm surface of a lake, every ripple a reminder of what they had taken. They adored the narrative of their triumph. They failed to see the dark silhouette rising behind them. Grief churns into action as I began laying the groundwork for my reclamation. I gathered tools, information, connections, weaknesses. My arsenal was not the typical fare of violent retribution, but of cold, calculated strategy. I began mapping their lives, each thread woven into a tapestry of their vulnerabilities, their secrets, their trivial sins. My pen etched every detail into memory, not for purpose or vengeance, but as a blueprint. I frequented the peripheries of their reality, savoring the art of being unseen while gathering pieces of their own armor. I noticed the little things, the way they exchanged glances filled with false trust, the minor grievances they whispered among themselves. Every click of their heels on polished floors echoed an opening where I could insert myself unnoticed, a chisel to crack their facade. With each observation, I transformed my grief into structure, drafting plans where they assumed fortitude. They had drawn blood, but now I would design my revenge to flourish in silence, a contextless act of fate they couldn't foresee. They basked in their presumed strength. They danced in shadows I was now preparing to eliminate. I scrutinized every conversation that scratched against my ear, mere fodder for the monument of my resolve. Mistrust rippled through their ranks, and I played into it without a single word spoken. The instruments of their downfall were already in place. They just hadn't learned to listen for the quiet storm brewing around them. In this world of deniability, I would remain a ghost, unseen yet profoundly aware, a confirming proof that they'd only ever sparked my renaissance. I severed the emotional ties that once defined me, cutting cords that tangled my existence in the aftermath of their betrayal. I opened myself to the void, embracing obscurity like a shield. My online presence vanished, a ghost among the digital crowd, no posts to give them a glimpse into my life. Their arrogance became my weapon, a siren song drawing them closer to disaster without them ever realizing it. I became the silent architect of my own dormancy, embracing the icy silence that followed. In this new state, I found control. I didn't need validation. I didn't seek out former connections. Instead, I shadowed their every move, calendars and conversations reduced to mere data points. Each frozen smile exchanged at a crowded cafe, every whispered secret shared beneath dim lights, played out like a grand performance in which I no longer had a role. They were actors, unaware of my gaze, convincing themselves of their triumph while I inhaled their delusion like cigarette smoke. Disappearing was no longer an act of retreat, but of strategy. They could not predict a man they didn't see. They communicated in muted tones while I listened, learning the cadence of their falsities. Where once my absence left a void, now I was the dark tide, rising silently to reclaim what was mine. I relished their miscalculations, knowing each misstep further tethered them to their impending doom. Their laughter rang hollow, a fleeting echo dissolving into the ether. I felt no urge to confront them. My purpose was far subtler. I tapped into the power of invisibility, assembling the foundations of their demise piece by piece, weaving a web of inevitability. As they reveled in their false sanctuary, I sharpened my focus. The world was a chessboard, and I was the unseen hand orchestrating their downfall. Each ghosted contact, each forgotten message added to the weight of their overconfidence. They believed they'd won, but victory is hollow when it blinds one to the lurking shadows. With every interaction, I nudged them closer to a mistake they could not escape. I appeared as nothing, a memory turned to mist. And even as they celebrated, I danced in the silence, watching, waiting. Their time would come, but not with a bang, a least expected whisper, a slow unraveling. No triumph is sweeter than the moment one realizes they were never as secure as they thought. My quiet resurgence had begun. Patterns began to emerge, a web of interconnected vulnerabilities glistening in the half-light, like silken threads waiting to be pulled. Their laughter, once raucous and intoxicating, now hung in the air with a sour stench of overconfidence, masking the decay beneath. Each whispered conversation, each furtive glance, illuminated their misplaced trust, the alliances they believed were unbreakable, yet were already starting to fray. I watched as they flitted about, blissfully ignorant of the tightening noose, each step forward bringing them closer to the edge. They felt invincible, like titans striding across an unyielding landscape. But every giant has a cracked heel. I took meticulous notes, documenting their habits and identifying their most prized assets. The weaknesses they held dear but never considered could be exploited. It was the young associate, bright-eyed and earnest, full of aspirations, but tethered to his mentors like a puppet on a string. They had invested in him, believing he would uphold their legacy, but I saw the shadow of uncertainty flickering in his eyes, a perfect leverage point. With him on my side, I could unleash chaos on their carefully curated empire, and they wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. I felt no urgency. Time was on my side. I could afford to wait as my influence expanded, subtly shaping tides within their circles. Allies began to shift in their perception of loyalty, whispers of discontent surfacing like bubbles in an otherwise placid pond. The cracks widened with each passing day, and I stood just beyond their periphery, cloaked in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They still underestimated me, believing my absence was defeat. Their sense of security, a fortress built on the ruins of my shattered trust, would become their undoing. All the while I remained like a falcon circling high above, watching, calculating, my talons poised for the strike. Soon, they would realize the predator that lurked in the shadows wasn't just watching. I was learning, and I was patient. I had turned their festering hubris against them, and soon the procession of their self-destructive choices would begin. The titans would tremble, not from the strength of an opponent, but from the sheer weight of their own folly, unaware that they were playing into my hands at every turn. The game had changed, and they were the unwitting players in a theater of their own demise. The darkness wrapped around me like a second skin, a cloak of shadows that concealed both presence and purpose. I had become meticulous in my orchestration, carefully nudging every critical piece into place. But then came the ripple, a disturbance in my carefully calibrated chaos. News filtered back through whispers. The young associate I'd cultivated, the anchor upon which my plan relied, was beginning to question his loyalty. He'd seen something he shouldn't have. A flicker of doubt ignited in his eyes, and I felt the air thrum with precariousness. I'd assumed his ambition would blind him to my true intentions, that I could mold him like clay. But a seed of uncertainty can flourish in the most unyielding earth. I paused, heart steady as I pictured the chessboard. The knight, my young asset, might turn against me. And just like that, the precision of my strategy hung in the balance, teetering delicately like a blade's edge poised for a sudden plunge. I wouldn't panic. Panic belongs to the weak. Instead, I recalibrated, analyzing the dimensions of this new threat. In the silent recesses of my mind, I sharpened my focus until it sliced through the distraction. Fear had no place here. Only options remained. I began plotting contingencies, the paths I had woven before still trailing like veins through the fabric of their circle. I reviewed my reconnaissance, noted the cracks widening beneath the surface, tools stowed away for when intuition became my map. He was a vital cornerstone, yes, but he was not the entire facade. Mistakes rippling outward from him could, if managed, become opportunities. I could turn his descent into confusion, sow mistrust among his mentors, drown them in their own assumptions. They'd never see it coming. Chaos often births from within, unnoticed until it's too late. Still seated in the black of twilight, I pondered my next move. I would mix shadows with light, whisper storms into the corners where they congregated. The respect they had for their own arrogance would lead one to cast doubt upon the other. A swift, surgical strike, drawn from the very fabric of their pride, fingers pulling their strings while they danced obliviously towards their demise. The timing was crucial now. I needed to plant the seed of betrayal in this associate's mind. Deep down, he sensed the shift. Every slight, every oversight they rendered against him, like little pinpricks to his ambition. I would escalate those pinpricks until they burgeoned into festering doubts. Then I would position myself as his only ally, the catalyst of his frustrations, the voice that would echo assurances in his ears. As this intricate web spun tighter, with every calculated knot securing their fate, my heart remained resolute. I had not fallen from grace, but rather was sculpted from the ashes. They'd thought me weak, and that illusion held. I would become the quiet consequence, slipping through the cracks they erected, watching from the periphery, manipulating from the unseen. They thought themselves safe, ensconced in their illusions, yet every misstep whispered of their certain unraveling brought closer. With that clarity, I embraced the idea of consequence. I let my resolve solidify like steel within. I was no longer a man seeking justice. I had become inevitability, a pulse in the silent chaos. If they wished to see strength, they would witness it. Just not in the manner they anticipated. I stood ready, a shadow eclipsed in the suffocating darkness, waiting patiently for the dawn of their downfall. Every fragment of their trust, every knee-bent allegiance would cascade, and though the storm rumbled at a distance, quietude filled the space around me. I would thrive amidst their noise, and when their time for reckoning arrived, I would be the ghost they feared, the echo of their hubris resounding louder than their laughter. That was the paradox of it all. They would shatter themselves, and I would merely watch. They thought the war was silent. In the dark corners of their perceived victory, a storm brewed beneath the surface, a quiet sabotage born not from bluster, but from deep observation. Businesses began to falter, clients whispered, allies grew hesitant. The fallout unfurled slowly, methodically. I had become such an artisan of revenge that the beauty lay in its imperceptibility. Watching their empire waver felt like molding clay into shape. One wrong move here, a subtle nudge there, and their facade cracked. I could almost hear the tremors of their foundation shifting as their laughter turned uneasy. They believed their shield was impenetrable, yet I was the phantom hand brushing against their pride, leaving streaks of doubt in my wake. Every failed pitch, every late delivery wasn't mere oversight. It was a meticulously crafted consequence echoing their own failings back at them. My greatest joy lay in knowing they were adrift in chaos they'd summoned themselves, unaware that I was the architect behind the disarray. I watched, feeling nothing, as they scrambled to salvage their standing, each erratic decision tightening the noose. It was as if I had flipped a switch, and the dim glow of their confidence flickered like a broken bulb. All the while I embraced the stillness. Power is feeling nothing while they feel everything. I could taste their fear in the air, an intoxicating scent woven with disbelief and dread. They were slowly realizing that someone was orchestrating their downfall, but it was too late to turn back to safety. Their panic was a warm sun. I stepped into its glow, not with triumph, but with cold resolve. I had trained my emotions into submission, wielding them as a weapon rather than a weakness. Their downward spiral wasn't my conclusive strike. It was the start of my reclamation. I wasn't watching from the sidelines, gleeful at their failures. Rather, I was calculating my next move, carefully calibrating each blow to resonate deeply without revealing my hand. They thought I was weak. Every moment of their arrogance fortified my resolve, and now their cracks were exploding. I remained the spectator they couldn't predict, the silent eye of the hurricane unraveling their fates. My power lay in their ignorance, in the facade they believed would protect them. Beneath layers of confidence lay their fears, mistrust, betrayal, all simmering, ready to boil over as soon as someone dared to poke at the surface. The last crucial asset had begun to fray. I'd fostered uncertainty within that young associate, my shadow lingering just behind him, whispering seeds of doubt. Now he was questioning everything he believed, a pawn that held the very foundation of their empire in his grasp. I tasted the sweet satisfaction of knowing they were scrutinizing loyalty in a chamber devoid of trust. Let them scramble. Let them feel the heat of their own panic, spiraling down the rabbit hole I had created with my meticulous patience. Their overconfidence had become their greatest sin, and I was the reflection they dared not meet. In this quiet war, I had become the very consequence they never anticipated, the shadow that guided their descent into despair. In this moment of reckoning, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. I didn't celebrate their failures. I let them drift deeper into the void I had orchestrated. Every peal of laughter now mingling with uncertainty felt like music resonating through the walls, a counter-harmony to their delusion. I reveled not in retribution, but in mastery, an artful dance that awaited its crescendo, with my silhouette the last thing they would realize before the curtain fell. While they imploded, I focused on the silence, the unyielding void that was beginning to envelop their world. It was far more terrifying than any explosive reaction. They were caught in a cacophony with no idea where to turn, while I remained the maestro of this quiet destruction, wielding my power with precision. And as they spiraled, I simply watched, devoid of emotion, ready for the inevitable moment when their unbreakable facade crumbled beneath the weight of their own betrayal. They thought it was coincidence, this chaos that had seeped into their lives like ink in water. Deals crumbled like ancient temples weakened by erosion. Partners fled their side, and discontent simmered among their once unbreakable ranks. I savored the symphony of their unraveling, a discordant refrain harmonizing perfectly with the arrogance they had wielded so carelessly. Each day brought fresh losses, each whisper echoing the uncertainty I had meticulously cultivated. I remained invisible as they scrutinized their surroundings, desperate to identify the knife hidden within the shadows. It was nothing less than poetic, watching them scramble, their panic thrumming lower and lower like the fading heartbeat of a wounded beast. Power resides in the stillness, I recalled, in the art of making them feel the encroaching dread of their collapse without revealing my hand. The young associate, now riddled with doubt, became a weapon I wielded. He was not just any pawn. He was the vessel of their downfall. My whispers shaped his uncertainties into questions that slashed at the very foundation of their empire. With every perceived slight, his trust eroded, turning allies against one another. They thought they were indomitable, yet they were merely actors in the final act of a tragedy I had choreographed with precision. Their confusion deepened like the night sky, thickening the tension that hung in the air. They busied themselves with futile attempts to restore balance, ignoring the fissures spreading in the rubble of their trust. I was everything they had underestimated, a phantasm orchestrating their descent into chaos. And the best part? They thought it was just a consequence of poor decisions, a cruel twist of fate, unaware that I was the tempest behind it all, eagerly drifting closer to the decisive moment. The betrayer reached out, desperation seeping through the digital threads that connected us. I feigned indifference as I logged in, reading the frantic emails, the pleading tone buried within urgent messages. I simply watched as he fought against the current that pulled him toward fully realized isolation. There was no need for dialogue, no point in resurrecting communication that had never existed before. Closure doesn't require conversation. My silence became the resounding answer he didn't want to hear. Apologies are best whispered to the dark, I thought, relishing the idea that he'd soon learn how truth and recognition were separated by thin lines drawn by vulnerability. My resolve could withstand the most profound collapse of his world. Each unanswered email was like a well-placed dagger, striking at the heart of his desperation, sending ripples of fear through his mind. I was not the hunter. I was the stillness before the storm, poised directly above, watching as the tempest brewed. Their downfall was no mere fate. It was inevitable math, a series of choices redirected by unseen forces. I smiled faintly to myself, feeling the edge of satisfaction. The illusion of power they carried in their laughter was crumbling. The predator was circling closer now, and when the moment came, they would pierce the silence, unsure of how they had sealed their fate. Let them scramble. I desired nothing from them but to witness their unraveling, to feel the weight of their arrogance as it crushed them under its own momentum. The tempo of their collapse quickened with every passing second, and all I needed to do was remain still, watching the pieces fall. They believed I was weak, but I was the conductor of their ruin. Soon, they would understand that this wasn't karmic retribution. It was simply the mathematics of consequence, the assurance that silence is the most powerful weapon of all. I reveled in the silence that had enveloped me like a comfortable shroud, an intimacy forged in shadows. Each passing moment of their frantic attempts to regain control felt like a well-timed heartbeat of a predator poised at the edge, savoring the thrill of the hunt. Power is patience with teeth, I understood. The kind of grit that doesn't rush for the kill, but waits for the unsuspecting moment when the prey tumbles into the snare. Days turned into weeks, each tick of the clock a testament to my resolve. I had once been the discarded, the underestimated. Now I was the architect of inevitabilities, crafting their downfall with every meticulous movement. I absorbed everything. The venomous whispers of doubt exchanged in hallways, the uneasy glances cast over coffee cups, the shifting tides of loyalty that undulated beneath their feet. All their animated celebrations were merely a facade crumbling at the edges. And then there was the final blow, the young associate, the cornerstone they had relied upon like a shield, buckling under the weight of their hubris. It was almost poetic, watching him unravel. I had planted the seeds of doubt with such precision that they had flourished into a festering garden of betrayal, and he was caught in the thorns. Every cruel dismissal he had endured, every slip of the tongue that belittled him, fanned the flames of discontent into wildfire. He turned on them, the allegiance that once seemed impenetrable now a shield of glass. They wouldn't just dismiss him, as they had me. They were trapped in their arrogance, believing him steadfast, blind to the weakness now echoing in their ranks, an echo only I could hear. The satisfaction I felt wasn't one of brimming triumph, but of quiet fulfillment, like a haunting scent of anticipation thickening in the air. I had orchestrated a collapse so multi-layered, so intricately woven, that it would be impossible for them to trace it back to me. They were the authors of their own demise, unable to recognize the ghost that haunted them, the very figure they dismissed as weak. They struggled against the tide, attempting to salvage what remained of their crumbling empire. Connections snapped like threads. Vital partnerships fell apart as panic seeped through their facade. I watched with eerie calm as chaos surged within their walls, every frantic meeting, every rushed email elucidating the schism growing wider and deeper. They thought they could weather the storm, but the calm before catastrophe has a unique flavor. I smiled to myself, knowing that no swing at the air would save them now. And then, in a final swift motion, I set the trap. It clicked into place like the dampened hammer of a sniper's rifle, poised and unwavering, guiding my breath into the moment I had long awaited. The last remaining bastion of hope, their trust in each other, shattered on its own, leaving them exposed, vulnerable and gripped with terror. They had become the shattered pieces of a glass figurine, incapable of piecing themselves back together. Apologies are best whispered to the dark. I chuckled softly, reveling in the stillness around me that felt like a prelude. They would grasp at nothingness, desperately seeking redemption. No spectacle was necessary. I didn't need to swing. I found satisfaction in their collapse, their absurdity, their delusions crumbling like dust in the wind, scattering in all directions. Each failure they faced felt visceral, closer, like the final moments of a dying star, bright and burning, but oh so destined for oblivion. I was the storm beneath the surface, the growing dread lurking just beyond their sight. They had thought me weak, a ghost that could be banished. Little did they know, their very invisibility had let the wolf into the fold. Soon they would realize their error, but by then I would already have savored the explosion of their illusions, the shattering of what they once held dear. Through it all, I remained the shadow, the orchestral conductor of their chaos, breathing in the atmosphere thick with desperation. In the embrace of silence, I steeled myself, preparing for a long-awaited release. My heart steady, poised on the cusp of revenge, elastic in tension, waiting only for the inevitable snap. I never needed their apology. As they scrambled to reassemble the fragmented pieces of their lives, I remained a specter beyond their grasp. The book they thought they closed still left open in the corner of their minds. They had painted themselves as victims of fate, but I bore witness to their self-destruction. The echoes of their laughter had turned into frantic whispers, each sound a reminder of their impending doom. In the aftermath of my absence, they floundered in a sea of uncertainty, grasping at familiar faces, but finding only the reflection of their own betrayal staring back at them. Every desperate phone call made to allies who had already turned was a translucent scream into the void, a silent cry that fell prey to my attentiveness. It was fascinating how the very bonds of trust they built now unraveled, fraying at the edges like an old rope left to wither in the sun. The young associate, once the star of their triumphant narrative, became a worn-out marionette, strings severed, free yet bewildered. The moment he turned from them, eyes wide with realization, I felt something crackle in the air, a charged electricity, scintillating with the promise of my vengeance. He was the detonator in this bomb I had silently constructed, and I was the hand guiding him to push that inevitable button. He played his part beautifully as he uncovered their lies and whispered betrayal struck chords that rang louder than their farce of a coalition. They thought they had built a fortress, impervious and strong, but I fortified the very foundation that would see them crumble. They reached out, flailing like wounded birds seeking flight in a capricious sky. The emails, the pleas for forgiveness, none were received, only returned to sender. I relished their confusion, the way their messages smudged together like ink bleeding on wet paper. They were lost in the labyrinth of their own making, desperately looking for a way back that would never emerge. I had closed the door behind me, leaving them without the keys they had long ago buried beneath their arrogance. Paralysis set in. They hesitated to confront the specter of doubt lurking in their minds. Each time they caught a glimpse in the reflection of their polished glass walls, a shard of trepidation splintered the assurance they wore like armor. They thought they were invincible, cloaked in the illusion of camaraderie. Yet their loyalties splintered as reckless ambition turned into betrayal's bitter sister. One by one, the pieces of their kingdom fell. Contracts collapsed, alliances ruptured, and whispers turned to shouts as blame ricocheted among them like shattered glass. I watched them engulfed in their chaos, feeling neither triumph nor sadness, but a hollow, icy satisfaction, a knowing of control. I became their blind spot, the pointed force they couldn't measure, and their realization came too late. I wasn't just an absence. I was the dark matter of their downfall. No, I hadn't come back to fix things. I'd returned to ensure that this wasn't the merely cyclical end of a tragedy. This was the fall, the end they never saw coming. And now, with the stage set and the spotlight directed inward, I relished the role of the unseen architect, coldly precise, shaping shadows into destinies as they floundered. In their final moments of acceptance, I remained numb, an indifferent observer to a spectacle birthed from their hubris. No greater display was necessary. They believed I would dance among their ashes, but my satisfaction lay not in celebration, but in the exquisite serenity of a well-executed plan. I had ignited the blaze that consumed the very throne they fought so hard to maintain. With no smoke and no fanfare, I let the flames roar. As their empire disintegrated, I faded once more into the shadows, a cautionary tale, an echo in the hallways. I would wait, perpetually unbroken, a paradox they had unwittingly carved from their own underestimation. They whispered doubts of their own incomprehension now. They would recall me, a memory untouched by emotion, a warning inked in silence that would weave its way through their lives long after the fire had burned out. In their desperation, they sought my forgiveness, but I had no need for their hollow words. If there was one lesson to be learned here, it was that in the depth of silence lies the true power. I wasn't here to be pitied or redeemed. I came to end them, to finish their story, and the last chapter had been written in their own collapse. The ghost they had disregarded had become the consequence they could neither evade nor reclaim. Now they whisper my name. The thin veil of tranquility I draped around myself over these past months has transformed into a protective shroud. In the hushed corners of bars and dim-lit restaurants, my absence has become an echo that resonates louder than any laugh they once shared. Their conversations slip through the air like whispers of regret, dread settling into the lines of their faces. It's a portrait of their own creation, painted with the colors of hubris and betrayal. No grand dramatic courtroom scenes, no powerful confrontations ensued. Just the cold finality of silence. It's an exquisite brand of revenge, not celebrated, but deeply felt. I watch from the periphery while they scramble to stitch together the remnants of their shattered alliances. The once thundering laughter now cracks under the strain of mistrust. Their mistakes, spurred by arrogance, unravel into a tapestry of their downfall. I find solace on this empty road. Each step I take leaves an imprint, a reminder of the transformation I've undergone. I am not the shattered man they presume to extinguish, but a silhouette, gently fading, carrying the weight of quiet power within me. I have exacted my vengeance without bloodshed, without noise, yet the impact rings through the air, like the tolling of bells. I turned their own weapons against them, not with malicious fury, but with the precision born from stillness. Each moment of their triumph, every apparent victory, each was a countdown to this very awakening. They thought me weak, and until the very end, they couldn't grasp the depth of their underestimation. Now, as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, the emptiness behind me feels freeing, a weight lifted from tired shoulders. The doors that once opened to false friendship now stand locked, leaving behind only the hollow sound of their desperate fists against wood. I am no longer a man seeking closure from imbeciles who believed I was a mere shadow. I have become my own silence, a haunting lesson about the quiet consequences of betrayal. I feel no urge for redemption from them. They are simply echoes in a distant chamber, fading into the obscurity they crafted. Any remnant of the emotional cost weighs light upon my heart, for I've shed the burden of anger. What once was a drive for revenge has morphed into this profound clarity found in the aftermath of chaos they wrought. Closure, perhaps. Was it worth it? That question has lost its weight. The outcome speaks louder than 1,000 arguments. It's done. Only the reverberations remain, the specters of their own making lingering long after the dust has settled. I walk forward, unfettered. A quiet smile graces my lips as I dissolve into the night, leaving nothing in my wake but whispers. My story has been written in their downfall, and I, the once invisible man, have emerged unscathed, a silent warning now spinning tales. Some don't fight back until their silence becomes your sentence. How sweet that truth tastes in my mouth.